as Lionel says, I actually train as an ecologist, but ecologists are meant to be very patient people and watch things happen like Attenborough. But as my wife is sitting in the back, I'm not very patient. So I realised that in order to get bacteria, so I'm a bacteriologist and microbiologist, to get them going, we need the help of engineers. So that's the kind of focus I have, looking at physical and engineered ways of getting microbes to do things. And we're, as Lionel suggested, we're particularly keen to link into energy and ways of making systems more sustainable. And the area that I've focused on, I'm going to be focusing on now, is water. Because in order to have clean water requires a lot of energy. To go from this, which is kind of industrial outlet, to avoiding this kind of system. Sadly, we have many parts of the world where people have to drink this kind of water. In order to go from that to the fortunate position we are in the UK to here, I put the middle bit in that I'm sure many of you have done some punting in your time. I'm sure many of you have fallen in. I grew up in Cambridge, so certainly fallen in a few times, knowing the chances were that, you know, I might drown, but I wouldn't die because I'd had a mouthful of water. So removing microbes from water is critical. Removing organics and metals are critical because of the equality of life. And the key to this is water engineering. Just briefly, you know, it's not that long ago since we were in this situation. Gin Lane, as some of you all know, where in preference to drinking water, people realised it was better to drink alcohol and gin, and I still have students to think that would be a preference. But as a consequence of that, people weren't in the fit state to do useful things, ended up with quite a lot of violence. But once the water engineers got engaged, and the key thing was separating waste, human waste, other kinds of waste from clean water, that then allowed populations to reliably and safely come together, growing cities, and then that kind of kicked off the Industrial Revolution. So I'm not a water engineer by training, but I've become one, and I'm just stressing the importance of water engineering historically. But I would suggest that in the future, it's going to be an area of increasing importance as populations grow. These three key people that changed the field, and changed the field surprisingly quickly. This guy here that some of you may have heard of, the father of epidemiology, where he correlated the presence of, this is a specific pump in Soho, he correlated the spread of cholera specifically to this pump here. As soon as the pump was stopped, then cholera incidents decreased. And from his work, as you know, people like tracking things like Ebola. So linking onto that, as you all know, many of you, in this country pronounced Bazalgette, was the guy who essentially put the infrastructure that many parts of the world have copied, and many parts of Britain still use, a Victorian system where we separate the sewage and the water system, and works really well. And the final person was a chemical engineer come medic that came out with a fantastic idea that if you actually put some chlorine into water, then cholera, you can see from the striking graph, you know, talking about scientists having an impact and job satisfaction, that cholera was essentially wiped out by his actions. So as I say, that's kind of the history of it, but it's unlikely that water engineering is going to become less important, irrespective of your thoughts on on climate change. Populations are going to increase. So there's going to be increasing pressure on water. Linked to that, as Lionel says, energy. We put a lot of energy into water to not least pump it around. So more localized treatment systems are going to be required. Linked to water resources, things about fracking, for instance, we're talking about extracting oil, inevitably is going to have impact on water. And the other key area linked to water is this whole area of dealing with the microbes that the early chemical engineers realized we needed to deal with. Still a problem, antibiotic resistance, and with increasing populations coming together in mega cities, that is not going to become less of a problem. And the solution to that has to come down to chemical engineering and water engineering to be able to deal with sudden occurrences of disease, which are likely to spread through water if it's not controlled. And just stressing the importance of water, which is already being recognised, that there have already been wars over petroleum. In the future, it's likely to be on water. So in terms of where we are, we've got an infrastructure that's very sound, been copied. Not a huge amount of research and thinking going into innovative ways of getting around the energy problem. As I say, that's a key problem. And we have other problems as well, just summarised here. I always show this graph just to capture the interest of the undergraduates. The suggestion is there's a strong correlation between the quality of water and sperm counts. Some striking figures from some very reliable journals, statistics suggesting like 50% decrease in sperm counts in the last 50 years. Now, not all of that is being correlated to water and water contamination. It's the way we live, tight trousers, laptops, generate heat. But certainly water is one of the key areas. So we can't relax. We need to be aware of some challenges, some more challenges here, just as alarming, again, to capture interest of the undergraduates on the BBC webpage. Things like Parkinson's disease certainly have been correlated with industrial solvents in water. Many of you will know of the contraceptive pill. As the water goes through down the Thames, it goes through our body 2 or 3 times as it's recycled. And in the treatment process we have, there is a tendency of the microbes in the treatment system to actually switch on the oral contraceptive, to actually make it more active. So, and lastly, the key area that we're focused on, and I keep explaining to my wife why I need to move to China. I specialise in treating groundwaters in my early career. 90% of the groundwaters in China, for instance, are contaminated with some very unpleasant contaminants. And as I suggest, this is likely to increase. There's a strong tendency for populations to congregate in super cities, and servicing those super cities is going to be an increasing challenge in order to try to maintain quality of the water. Not least, industry will inevitably be where the super cities are, because we need people to work. And industry generates some very unpleasant water and uses a lot of water. So I work very closely, something like 25% of the water that's used is coming from, it goes to industry. So where domestic waters are quite easy to treat, and there's a lot of thinking in that, there aren't that many academics actually thinking about these industrial waters. There's a tendency just to leave those problems to the problem holders. So that's one area that we're beginning to look at a lot more. And I spent a few years, this is actually a project started long before I joined engineering with a DPhil student. I was an external person. So we started a project in the engineering workshop here in the late 90s or mid-90s, I can't remember when it was. I now know he's a professor, so it's a few years ago. So metalworking fluids, key stone of a modern society. We've all arrived here by trains and cars. So in order to produce things, we use these oily, watery emulsions and produce a large quantity of it. It's specifically designed to be antimicrobial because when you're in an engineering workshop, what you don't want are bacteria to start to grow, because not least the quality of the oil will go down, the quality of the cutting will go down. So there's a lot of antimicrobials going in, and they're intrinsically designed to be antimicrobial. Disposal, and this is kind of a problem that's worked very closely with Ford, who have been very generous in supporting a lot of the research. So they're a very innovative company, as many of you will know, and they're the trendsetters. So they're very aware, to treat the metalworking fluids, it's tankered off site. So that's a concern in terms of health and safety. Also, it generates a big carbon footprint. They don't want to be shifting it. They want to be treating it on site. At the moment, they're treating it on site, but using these systems, ultrafiltration, reverse osmosis, energy intensive. So as Lionel said, the Energy Institute, it's not just about storage, it's actually about how can we save energy, because that's one of the key things that you hear a lot more in industry than you do in the outside world. Capital costs running these things is not simple. And also what they essentially do is to concentrate up the pollutant. They filter it out, and so you end up this nasty mass or something you still got to get rid of, and a lot of that still goes to landfill. So we, as I say, I train as an ecologist, so when I look at engineering problems, I kind of think, well, what would happen, in the world? What can microbes do? Because inevitably, microbes will kill you, but having said that, there are many microbes that do really useful things, as many of you will know. Think of probiotics. So what we started was a screening program. This is metalworking fluid. We work very closely with BP Castrol, who hold a library of prematurely degrading metalworking fluids. So metalworking fluids, for some unknown reason, bugs have started growing in it. So I come from a molecular background, so we did some kind of stuff you may be familiar with, for things like crime watch, fingerprinting, exactly the same technique to work out what organisms are in the system. We did a global census, so took samples from all over the world, which was sent to Castrol, who said, these are problem metalworking fluids. So they provided them to us. And from that, we kind of worked out there were just 3 or 5 bugs, bacteria, that were very, very effective at degrading metalworking fluids. So we kind of got the genetic fingerprint. The next step we knew were there was to actually isolate them. So knowing they're there, you can start isolating them. And from that, we isolate, and this took 2 or 3 years to do, difficult work, because this stuff is very, very toxic. Anyway, we then got a suite of organisms, and these just shows you the small microcosms that we still use. Bacteria grow in the holding matrix. And the great thing about bacteria, they're scalable. Once you've got, a cup full of good bacteria, then you can then scale according to exactly what you want to do. And that's one of the great strengths that the engineer, I have to say, when I spoke to the engineers in Ford, initially I kind of thought, oh God, is it an ecologist turning up? What we're going to get. But then when they realize the kind of things that you can do, you can scale, and it's pretty cheap. And so we have scaled it up. This is kind of work we've done with BA Systems. And just highlighting a case. So this is showing you what happens when this is a fill and draw system. So the graph COD is basically pollution load, the organic you're trying to get rid of. The graph is, as one load is treated, then you hit the baseline, get rid of that, it goes out the reactor, and the cells are held on the holding matrix. Then you're kind of doing a fill and draw system. And what you're after is this legal limit. That dotted line is what Ford is after, because anything over that limit, per litre they get fined. And for some sites, it's millions of pounds. I won't give the details, but they lose a lot of money on these fines, because their view is it's cheaper to just pay the fines, which the ethics of it is a different issue. So what we found, which is a striking result, and again, the traditional engineers are kind of shocked, because the problem with ultrafiltration, any system starts off as new, it's fantastic, it's very efficient, but inevitably efficiency goes down. Biologically, you kind of get the opposite if you manage the system properly. Bugs are very, very adaptable, they change. And you can see there's the baseline. This is how effective it is, got rid of all the waste. The baseline actually goes down as the community adapts. So it's getting used to the conditions in the reactor and actually performs much better. And this was enough to impress the collaboration we had with Ford and BP. And also it's now been commercialized, and the companies have been doing some field trials. This just shows you the scale. Anyone from Bridgend may recognize the reactors. And this picture just shows you dirty metalworking fluid and the clean form. So it works pretty well. As I say, it's scalable. So we've been through a recession, so they have less reactors. As they have more production, they just add more reactors that are very cheap to put into place. There are some challenges. Microbes are living things like us, and you can poison them. And we did have a problem when we first had trials in Dagenham, and then the reactors stopped working on a Monday morning, which is a bit of a shock, kind of how to work out the British working cycle. And what we found was that it's a very simple system. We train the local guys how to use the reactor. And they were so confident this stuff worked, they kind of threw anything in it and it worked, that they set up a little sub-business, getting rid of old paints and paint strippers, and we're throwing in a Monday morning. So once we stopped, so even if you have these systems, they need to be properly managed, and training is a critical thing to be able to do. So just moving on, so that's kind of where we are, and commercially that's where we are, but my group, we've moved on, so there's a commercial arm that I still talk to the guys, they're based out in Begbroke. But my research group, so this is one of the first bits, I joined the department in 2008, something like that, so this is one of the first, again, the focus being on energy. So at the moment, what we're doing commercially is converting the carbon to CO2 and water. Ford love it because you can do it locally and it's working well. But what you can do with microbes, a whole load of different kind of microbes, and if you do this system without oxygen, you get generation, and you pick the right bacteria, and we've been through the same system, actually generating hydrogen and methane. So you have a problem on site, oil, that you can actually convert that to methane, to energy. And then the water is recycled, so it's kind of moving much more to a kind of a sustainable system and works very well. Going on further, again, stressing the remarkable capacity of microbes that if you look out there, you can find some very useful ones. And this is actually a project done by one of our fourth-year projects who was an engineer, never done any microbiology, and by the end of it, we've isolated a bacteria that is very, very effective at generating this compound here. I don't want to say it's irrelevant, but it's a precursor to bioplastics. So what you have is an oily waste, which is toxic and a damn nuisance. Want to get rid of it, can start converting it to something that's very useful. Again, now kind of focusing what I'm focused on now, the challenge we have is that you can push living things to a certain extent, a bit like students, and then they keel over, and then there's complaints. And the challenge is this bit here, the baseline. Because as we're making bugs that can treat the metalworking fluid, so Castrol and other companies are actually making metalworking fluids that are even more difficult to degrade. So it's kind of an arms race, which is good fun. It keeps me in work. It's getting rid of this plateau here. And that's due to the chemicals that they're using, different chemicals, and also biocides, and also the presence of co-contaminants, things like metals, because you're cutting metal, using it to cut metal, so the concentration of metal goes up. So we've been looking at ways of getting rid of this really difficult stuff. And one of the reasons we concentrate on this is if we can degrade this stuff, this plateau here, we can probably just about degrade anything. And there's an awful lot of contaminants in the environment that need to be treated sustainable. So it's become very much of a model for us to look at other things. So just shifting on a bit, kind of, I think we've pushed the biological system. I'm very good at selling how fantastic microbes are, but the realization is you push them too hard, they're going to keel over. So, and one of the advantages and one of the great things of joining Oxford is that it's given me exposure to different kinds of people. Out in Begbroke, it's multidisciplinary. We have a materials department, so I started talking to the guys there. And this area of nanomaterials, which some of you will be familiar with, but just briefly, if you take something like gold, I wear a wedding ring, it's inert, it's a macro kind of ordinary scale that we're familiar with. But at very micro scale, 100 nanometers, it's a phenomenal catalyst. It's because of its increased surface area, it becomes very, very reactive. Very little work, it's the kind of thing the medics have picked up on. They realise that nanomaterials have huge potential in terms of curing cancer, delivery, and there's work being done in the IBME. Very little work done in terms of exploitation, getting microbes to do things large scale. And that's kind of, I work with quite a lot of microbiologists. Most of them are used to working at test tube scale. The challenge is exploiting that potential which is realised in an engineered, scalable form. And very, very few people are thinking in those terms. And that's kind of why I like teaching engineers, to get them interested, because we need a different kind of thought process to scale up. And this is some remarkable work. I was talking to one of the guys here from the water industry. A nanomaterial up here happens to be a waste product that a student brought over from Brazil for smelting. Reddish, it's an iron oxide, so it's got that distinctive red colour. It has remarkable properties, and the great thing is it's a waste, so there's mountains of this stuff around the world. And this just shows you what it can do, and we didn't realise at the time, but should be given the remit, what can you do with the stuff that's useful? So we started to play with it. And what you find is that this is metalworking fluid, which is the emulsion, as 10% solution. As soon as you put the nano iron in, sticks to it like, sticks, yeah. You know, I'm thinking blankets and other kind of stuff. So it literally does stick to it like that, and very, very quickly. And in terms of treating wastewaters, the biggest challenges we have are not necessarily things like oil waste, when you think of the BP leak, are these trace contaminants. Things like hormones, present and low concentration, have disproportionately large effect. Microbes are not interested in them because the concentration is so low, it's not worth kind of switching on their gene system. So, but this kind of system is you throw in the nano iron, which is essentially like cigars, and it shows you the scale. You should be able to see the scale bar there, but these are about 200 nanometers across. And what we think is happening is that the nano iron is immobilizing the organic. That reduces the toxicity. So the iron has a coating of this organic on the outside, lower toxicity. Then we introduce our bugs, and then you get increased degradation. We also get Fenton's reaction, in situ Fenton's reaction. For the chemists amongst you, normally you need hydrogen peroxide, which is, for health and safety, is not a good thing to have on site. The great thing about this nano iron is it intrinsically produces its own hydrogen peroxide. And this graph here, I'm not going to go into details, but basically shows you there's something that's not degradable, becomes degradable and available for bacterial degradation. So, you immobilize the problem, and it also works very effectively for metals. So you can isolate your problem, you can recycle the water, and then you can actually then treat this and then recycle it. So it's a nice business model that I'm kind of just thinking of. You can actually, yeah, anyway, I'm not going to give too much away. Going on, and I'm kind of moving a little bit more. How am I doing for time? Not, am I right? I'm very aware of that match. Critical tonight, Sarah. Going on, so the other kind of challenges, again, we waste an awful lot of energy cleaning up water and then flushing our toilets and watering our gardens. So the way we use water is going to have to change. But the key concern is there are a lot of water bodies vulnerable to bacteria to grow in them, and some of these are very nasty. So things like chlorine, you think of a swimming pool, put a large amount of chlorine into it to stop bacteria growing. But if that was an industrial system and you wanted to recycle the water, you'd have to remove the chlorine. To remove chlorine from water requires a lot of energy. So what we require are smarter ways of protecting the water that doesn't require a lot of energy. And this, again, going to nano iron. Hopefully you can see this. This shows you Ecoli, that most of you are familiar with. Nano iron that we synthesize, the material guys have shown us how to use. And Wei Wang in the back, who, if you stick your hand up, he worked as a postdoc with me. Unfortunately, we've been very lucky. One of the first things that Lionel did when I suggested that we should get Wei back, he got Wei back, and he's now a professor in the department we're pleased to have. Anyway, he's developed this nano iron so it sticks to the bacteria. So what we have here is that the bacteria is in the water, you want to get rid of it, you throw in the nano iron, it coats the cells, and you can see here it's actually, you can actually manipulate the bacteria, which I don't think any microbiologist has been able to do. We've been trying to do that. So we actually have a physical way of directly controlling the bacteria and isolating them, which has, I think, huge potential. And we've not really worked much to exploit that potential. But the really smart thing that I would like to be able to do is actually target specific kinds of bacteria. as you'll know from probiotics, some bacteria are very good for you, some are very bad. If we could actually target specific bacteria, instead of trying to kill everything, it would just kill the key ones. Also, in terms of exploitation, we are very effective, Wade's very effective with the Raman microscope that EPSERC have just bought us to actually work out which bacteria down a microscope is actually degrading a compound. With this approach, potentially, we can actually capture those cells and then put them on a Petri dish. So a very exciting technology. This doesn't always work, so, oh, I think it might work. This just shows you cells in the lab, coated in nanoiron. Great little video. It doesn't last very long, so don't blink. So that's bacteria that we're actually manipulating. It's early stages. What we want to be able to do is to drag them out and the individuals. But again, in terms of manipulating, focusing, and lowering energy, huge amount of potential. As I said about the rugby, I come from a French-Italian background, so my mother was a very good cook. So garlic, fantastic stuff. Been known to the Egyptians that garlic is a very strong antimicrobial. And one of the things that concerns an industry, not least metalworking fluids, as antimicrobials, they use quite nasty chemicals, things like formalin, formaldehyde, and chlorine. Some of those are being banned. They're very, very unpleasant, particularly, I mean, some of them are carcinogenic. So there's a strong drive to develop alternatives. And to suggest organics like garlic, you consider to be a little bit eccentric, which I don't really care what people think. What we found, again working with the nanomaterial people, is that garlic, and the moment you cut the clove, is phenomenally antimicrobial, as strong as any kind of chemical you can think of, like formaldehyde. But as you'll know, the cooks amongst you, that smell quickly disappears, so you lose the potency. What we've done here, the allicin is the active component. We've actually amalgamated the allicin to nanogold, and you don't need much gold. And this just shows you, this is a Petri dish impregnated with our gold, and you can see clearing, and the graph just shows you the size of the clearing. Strong antimicrobial, stable. We found it's remarkably stable, we're still working on it. And the way we think it works is actually by affecting the membrane. Hopefully you can see here, there's a hole in the membrane, and eventually the cell just bursts. The exciting thing about it is that the problem with antibiotics is that you just need one gene mutation and you get resistance. This is multifaceted. There's a lot of different chemicals involved, we think. So the chances of having 3 or 4 mutations that have the same effect much smaller. So we think it's going to have a much longer effect in terms of antimicrobial resistance. This is a project essentially been stolen from the medics who kind of know about it. They did publish it so we could copy it. And again, there's not that much thinking amongst microbiologists to see what molecular biologists who get a lot of money, what they're doing. So what they're trying to do is to actually kill specific cancer cells. So we've kind of copied that. So what this shows you, this graph here, these are mesoporous silicates, 200 nanometers, so we're talking very small scale. But they're not difficult to make. We can teach our undergraduates pretty quickly. And they're sponges. They're very good at absorbing biocides. So what we did was, and you have little wells here, you load the biocide, and you throw the particles into the water, and it diffuses out, and you get a smart biocide. But as initially, you couldn't control the release. So what we've done is to cap this is working with chemistry. We've capped the pores, the outside of the wells, with a sugar. So when you release it into the water, and the system is sterile, there's no bugs in it. With this material, you can recover it because we've got an iron core, so you can actually recover it in a way that doesn't require huge amounts of energy. So looking at chlorine and water, removing that's a problem. With this, this is easy. Or easier, and requires less energy. If there's a bacteria in the system, like students always hungry, they eat the sugar, but importantly, they actually release the biocide exactly where the cell is. So the killing potency is much more effective, so you don't need such high concentrations. And you can load whatever you want on it, and it's an area that we continue to work on. Future perspectives. I guess I covered some of those. I think that to be sustainable, we're going to have to rely on biological systems. We're going to have to train engineers to understand biology. It's going to have an enormous impact. Things like synthetic biology are going to have an enormous impact, not least on information technology. If you think the amount of information DNA holds, if we could extrapolate that to a computer. So biology is inevitably going to expand, and that's kind of why I try to teach biology to the undergraduates. And again, developing ways, I continue to be interested in waste metalworking fluids, because they are a very good model because they're so difficult to degrade. Unfortunately, we know a lot about the chemistry, working closely with the manufacturers. We've just got some funding for UPSRC to actually look at hybrid technologies. And that's one of the challenges we find as my days working with industry is the tendency, industrialists are very good. They look at a problem and say, we're going to deal with it. Where academics tend to say, well, I'm a physicist, I'm going to throw physics at it. I'm a chemist, I shall throw chemistry at it. So hybrid, cross-disciplinary kind of research, industry is a good place to do it, because they kind of say, let's just solve the problem. So that's kind of what we've done here. We've linked up with the chemical engineers up in Newcastle. They specialise in using these electrodes to split water and generate different kind of products from the waste. In this case, we're going to be generating a formate. The formate is then going to be passed on to these sim cells, which are synthetic cells that can convert, and bacterial cells, convert the formate to oils. So again, and the way we envisage this, the energy input from that would be from solar. Again, a very sustainable way of recovering the potential of the water. I think it's towards my last slide. Another key area that we're very interested in doing a lot of work, and now Way's joined the group with his expertise in synthetic biology, are biosensors. So being able to detect organics, pollutants in real time. And this is not a new kind of approach. It's based on the kind of the canary down the mine. When a canary fell off his perch, you knew it was time to leave. So what we've done in a slightly more sophisticated way, take the gene out from the fireflies, you know, it fluoresces, put that into Ecoli, and then you get, when the bacteria is happy, it fluoresces, but it's not come out terribly well. But as the concentration of the pollutant goes up, so fluorescence goes down. So you can actually quantify how much pollution there is in there and link that electronically to computers. You can have continuous monitoring of the environment. And going even further, an area, so these are metabolic genes, sensors. Catabolically, you can do the reciprocal, which is actually introduce genes so they only fluoresce in the presence of a particular element in the environment. So potentially you can genetically engineer, or something like Way would be able to genetically engineer, a cell released into the environment, only switches on and fluoresces in the presence of a valuable element such as silver. And when I give this presentation, it's interesting that it's the mining companies are thinking, right, this is interesting, because as resources become rarer, we need to have more effective ways of detecting. But their application in terms of water systems is enormous, and also designing new chemicals. I've spent a career trying to treat chemicals end of life microbiologically, and some of them are phenomenally toxic. And the realization in industry is that they need to think preemptively about what chemicals they're putting into a product. And this will be a very effective way of actually testing what the potential effect is if they get into water systems. So again, preemption reduces the amount of energy that will be required to deal with the problem in the end. Yeah, just one more, linking So these algae we also work with. Algae are fantastic in that they will tap light energy and convert that to useful products, in this case to biodiesel. And the reason why there's so much interest in this area is that if just looking at productivity per hectare, if you compare soya or any kind of product which is being used enormously at the moment, compare that to algae, phenomenal capacity. So again, a lot of interest in that. And this is kind of work for talking with Arup, where they're already thinking in terms of integrating use of algae into their buildings. So it captures light, wastewater from the shower or from the dishwasher goes into the system, purifies the water, and from that you can actually generate some energy. So the water doesn't actually have to leave the site. And again, that saves a huge amount in terms of the carbon footprint. So in summary, the kind of way I see things are going, low energy, decentralized systems, which inevitably, certainly industrial systems, that's where Ford want to be, and I'm sure they are the trendsetters for many companies. Recycling, miniaturization of treatment systems are going to be required. Real-time automated sensing, so we know exactly what's out there, not just as a problem and as a contaminant, but also as a potential resource. Hell of a lot of really useful stuff end up going end of pipe, but it could be recycled. And some of these are very expensive, things like selenium. And nanomaterials for treatment of water. As I say, what we do at the moment is to deliver very clean water to the house, so you can drink all of it. Hell of a lot of it goes to flushing the toilet, washing your car, watering your garden, which is crazy. So anticipate sort of the future would be delivery of grey water to the house that you can then treat yourself using nano-based filtration systems. All right, just a quick advertisement. If you're interested in, we've just got a large amount of funding with geography looking at water security, and there's going to be a conference in December, so if any of you are interested in that, let me know. And these kind of things we're going to be looking at is looking at third world countries, hideous statistics, 5,000 babies a day die, and there's got to be ways of getting rid of that. Well, I think that's a sign for me to stop. So we're going to be looking at pathogens, decolorization of dyes. Many of us are wearing clothes from made in Bangladesh. Many of these dyes are carcinogenic, so we're going to be looking at that. And also intrinsic waste problems, things like arsenic. My most important slide, thanks to the group for helping me, many groups I've had. BBSRC and NERT for funding a lot of this, Microbial Solutions, the company that I founded that have allowed me to, and also BP, Castrol. Also Wei-Wang, as I say, thanks so much for your help. And also Chris van der Gas has also now just been made professor, who was an undergraduate here. So thanks so much for your time. Any questions?